Hey, you know you're thinking it, just go ahead and say it. My wife said it when she first saw it. It's gotta be the ugliest shovelhead I've seen in a long time. This is a 1972 Harley-Davidson FLH, which was the full electric glide bagger back in the day. It came with the fiberglass saddlebags, buddy seat, sometimes a solo windshield or a full bat wing fiberglass windshield like everybody's running on the street glides these days. But this was the heavyweight motorcycle for 1972. I've owned about a dozen of these over the years. The first time I rode to Sturgis was on a 1972 FLH. The first FLH I had was a 72. So here I am 35 years later with another 1972 FLH, the world's ugliest shovelhead. Follow along with me as I convert this thing into an actually pretty rad bike. I'm gonna strip the saddlebags off of it, change the seat, change the handlebars, take the crash bars off of it, make it kickstart only. I'm gonna take probably about 125, 150 pounds off this bike, make it easier to work on, a lot of fun to ride, and give it a really cool vibe. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, like, subscribe, leave me a comment. I do read through your comments, you guys know that. I read through them and respond to as many as I can. I'm gonna get it up off the ground on the Hmc Airlift. If you're looking for airlift to work on, I recommend HMC Industries. Really, really great lift. I've got several of them here in the shop and couldn't be happier with them. To me, they're the best that's available. That's why I'm using them. Harley-Davidson Star Hub. They call it a mid-star hub because it's, I think, 1965 through the early 70s. Their original Star Hub was pre-65, but you know, this is a hydraulic drum brake. So the drum bolts to the wheel by these 5 bolts. You know, I call them lugs. You know, kind of like the lugs from a car. There's 4 of them. There they are. So I take them out because I need to get them out to get the wheel out of the bike. I gotta get the wheel out of the bike so I can get the seat off and get the fender and everything else off. So I'm going to pop the wheel out now. I've been using these HMC Airlifts and I forgot that they have this nice feature, which is a rear wheel drop out. So I can just pull the drop out off this lift and pull the wheel out. The other lifts I've been using for years don't have it, so I'm not used to having it, but a real nice feature. Now I got the wheel out, I can start taking the seat off. You know, all this fender hardware has to be reached from the inside to get all this saddlebag hardware off, crash bars. Really start getting all this stuff apart. Strip it down so I can paint it and remove the stuff I don't want. Once I get that upper shock stud out, you see it's loose from the front of the bike. I gotta disconnect this bracket from the fender. I'll take this whole cage off as a unit. You don't throw this stuff out anymore. I mean, back in the old days you did, but now all this stuff is getting hard to find. Everybody wants it, so take it off in one piece and let somebody else enjoy it. I'll go do the same thing on the other side. Loosen up the fender and this thing's ready to come off. The saddlebag cage is ready to come off. It got stuck here in between the frame and the exhaust bracket. I take the exhaust bracket off anyhow to paint it. So I'm gonna get that off now. This thing will start to come apart pretty quick. That was kind of slow going, a lot of hardware holding that thing on. Now that I got it basically off, things ought to go pretty quick. So that thing right there, no kidding, weighs 20 to 25 pounds. Just this part, plus the luggage rack, plus the bags. So right there, you gotta say, probably about 35, 40 pounds off the bike, everything all in. That's 3 to 4 pounds right there. Next up, I'm gonna finish getting the seat off. Now that I got the wheel out, I can access these bolts that go through the back of the fender to hold the seat on, get everything off, and get this big heavy thing off of there. But I'm gonna take this kicker off. I'm just sick of looking at it. When I started riding in the late 80s, this was the thing, all the O-ring, foot pegs and kickers, and I always hated it. I'm sick of looking at it, so we can take it off. Now, even though I know I'm gonna change it, I just want to get it off there because I just can't stand even looking at it for one more second. That thing's got to weigh almost a pound, man. It's super solid and heavy. If you want that thing that's outside the door, come and get it. It's sitting out there in the parking lot. This is the kind of stuff, like a seat like this, you can't access it unless you can get under the fender with the wheel out. And if you're stuck somewhere on the road and you need to get under the seat for something, you're screwed. I mean, you can pop the seat off of the bracket, but like, they made these bikes so hard to work on. If you need to do transmission work, it'd take you half a day just to get the stuff off the bike so you can get to the transmission to do that work. So, and that's where these bikes usually need to work, was in the transmission and the primary cover on the other side. That was where the problems always happened. And they're just so hard to work on. So I love stripping them down. I love the way they look when they're stripped down, but I also love the way they are to work on it because I'm gonna ride this bike a lot. I'm gonna ride it some distance. And if you're out riding and you need to be able to fix something, you wanna be able to just get to what you're getting to, fix it, and get back on the road. Somebody used an old key ring. There's a pin in it. There's a spring bar that runs up this seat post right here. Call it pogo stick. And it's like a pogo stick spring that allows the seat to have a suspension on it. And there's a pin that connects it to the seat. And the pin should have like a small hitch pin or cotter pin in it. And somebody put an old key ring in there, you know, an old spiral key ring like you put your keys on. And that thing's all rusted, stuck up in there, so I gotta fight that out. That thing right there, about 15 pounds. I'm gonna take the oil tank out. Once you get that out, it's a lot easier to get the gearbox out. The gearbox is already loose. Like I said to you before, somebody had rebuilt this engine in 94, 95 and never put it back on the road. They definitely had the gearbox out. They didn't go through it, that's for sure. The gearbox is gonna need to rebuild at some point. I'll kind of go over that with you a little later on. But anyhow, get the oil tank out, get the gearbox out, you know, start taking the front end off, get the motor out, rear fender off. And I'm, you know, foot controls and a crash bar, and I'm basically ready to start getting this frame and stuff ready for paint. I'll get the frame and everything ready for paint, and that takes some, the paint takes some time to prep and to dry, so while that stuff's drying, I'll do all these other things that need to be done in the body. A lot of other little things I want to do, so once I get the paint done and while the paint is drying, I can do a lot of other things. When I get done with those things, the paint's done, I can start putting it back together. So it's kind of how I economize my time. Where are you gonna go? She knew the big seat was up here before. She was laying up on top of that seat because she could queen over this whole area down here and see everything that was going on. And now the seat's gone, so what are you doing? Hey. Well, this little cat sure lucked into a good life. What are you doing? What are you doing? My kids love her, right? And she's good with the kids. That's her redeeming quality. Because she's a little varmint, aren't you? You a little varmint? Harley-Davidson 4-speed gearbox. I'm gonna set this gearbox over here so that this, and that should be everything I need. Take that fender off. Yeah. So there's my rear fender rig. I'm probably gonna keep this lighting set up. I really, you know, I'm not big on a ton of accessories on these things, but the rear lighting rig's pretty cool. It's always really good to be seen when you're out there, and if you burn out a tail light bulb or something, you still got on that thing 4 other running lights to kind of keep you lit up at night. So, keep you safe and stop you from a lot of hassles. So, you know, I'm probably gonna leave that rig on there. If I don't like it, I can always take it off. That's the nice thing about it. Take the rear brake drum off. You know, I'll measure the diameter. The max diameter is 8.060 inches. So I'm measuring to make sure it's not too thin. If it is, I'll replace the drum. But the sprocket looks good on it, so it doesn't seem like it has that many miles on it, because usually when they do, the sprocket's real wore out. Like these teeth get real worn out. And so you can kind of generally tell by the general wear and tear of a bike, even though this thing's rusty, if it's been sitting since 94, 95, you know, that's 20, 25, 27 years, 28 years it's been sitting that it hasn't been in service. So even though it's old and it's, you know, in rough condition, it probably hasn't been ridden that much. And the same with I look at the gearbox. I'll go over the gearbox with you in a little more detail, but I look at the gearbox and I can see that it's not that bad for the age of the bike. So generally what I'm thinking is somebody probably ran this low on engine oil and junked the engine on it, and that's why the engine had to come out and be rebuilt in the 90s, but the rest of the bike was in pretty decent condition. So you know how it is, if it was sitting and somebody had the engine rebuilt, that probably took 3 to 6 months, and you know, so this thing may not have even been on the road since the early 90s, you know, is the reality of it, even though it was registered. So everything's in pretty good condition. I feel like I got myself a pretty decent deal. I paid this a little over $3,000 for this thing. The gearbox is worth $1,000. The engine's worth $1,500, $2,000. The frame with the title and swing arm and everything's worth $1,000. Front end's worth $750. You know, the wheels are worth $500. And if you add everything up, what's here, I definitely, in parts, it's worth a lot more than what I paid for it. Yeah, it is the world's ugliest shovelhead, but I'm gonna fix that. But you know, definitely a good buy, definitely worth salvaging. And you'll see, I mean, old Harleys, you never find them in a junkyard because they were built to last forever. Harley-Davidson builds these things to last forever. You might need to rebuild them and do some stuff to them, but you know, this bike is gonna remain mine, and it's gonna look really great, and I'm gonna ride the wheels off of it. And you know, 20 years from now, and we'll be looking back and laughing at this video and saying, damn, remember when how ugly that shovelhead was? And so, you know, I'm getting to the point where I'm getting in the final stages of stripping it down and really looking forward to cleaning it up. You know, it's nice when you get something this far apart, you can inspect everything. That way, when I put it back together, you know, I'm riding this somewhere from riding to Texas or to California from Tennessee. I know what's under me because I've been through the whole thing. So, and it's not that much work to do this. I mean, it's, you know, it takes a full day to strip it. It's going to take me, you know, 2 full days to assemble it, and a couple of days in between to paint it and make it look the way I want and make a few changes on it. But all in all, you know, once I'm done, I've got a bike that I've been over from top to bottom, front to back, that I know is ready to roll. Like the brake shoes on the rear brake are a little glazed over, but they look really good, and there's no sign that there's brake fluid leakage in here. Now I'm going to want to drain the fluid and clean it all out and everything, and I have another wheel cylinder if I have to change it. I know the front master is wiped out. I'm going to replace that one, but this rear one, there's no sign inside that there's any, you know, that's what you look for. You look for grease that will come out of the wheel bearings, and you look for brake fluid that would have come out of the wheel cylinder. And I don't see either one inside here. It's, you know, rusty from sitting and not being used, and you know, brake dusty, but it doesn't show signs of, you know, any kind of catastrophic damage or anything that's not overcomable. So that's a good sign. The same with the swing arm. I grabbed the swing arm. The swing arm is in tight. You know, when these bikes get a lot of miles on them, the swing arm bearings wear out, and they're real sloppy back here, and it makes them ride like hell. This one's nice and tight in the back end. So these are all positive things that I'm finding that, you know, kind of reassure me that I got myself a good find here. A good 1972 Harley-Davidson FLH shovelhead. Brake line's in actually really good condition. You know, a lot of times they're dry rotted and you got to be concerned about them, but this one, because the gearbox was leaking gear oil, which is common in the 4-speed, you see the whole back of the bike on this side is caked with heavy grease, and oil, and dirt. On the other side is really not that much because the chain rides here and the transmission leaks on this side. So everything's pretty well preserved back here, which is actually a really good sign. My wiring harness is actually in pretty good shape. It doesn't seem like it's been cut on or spliced into too much, so that's kind of nice. Save me a bunch of time there if I don't have to redo all that. See, that thing's dry as a bone. It's got a hole for a grease fitting on the bottom, but the grease fitting's been out of it forever. And it's dry, and you can see the studs coming a little loose from the foot control. I'll fix all that stuff while I have it apart. I do not expect this to come out without a fight. Let's find out what happens. Maybe these wrenches out of the way, but hear it. Let me put some spray lube on it. I stick a center punch through the footboard mount because it's hard and it allows me to crank on it pretty good. There it goes. All right. Here's my master. You can see by the rust and the dirt and debris that's in that plunger piston bore. This thing's probably no good. I'd already bought a new rebuilt one. You know, this can maybe be rebuilt. I'll find out when I take it apart. I'm not gonna mess with it now. I'll try it later. But this is the kind of stuff that, you know, I mean, you don't wanna mess with your brakes. Drum brakes aren't that great to begin with, and when the hydraulics on them fail, they're no fun. That foot control off, pull that bolt, take the front crash bar off. Here's my method for getting engine mount bolts out. Use a smaller wrench to lift up. It pulls it out for you. I'm gonna go ahead and take the swing arm off now while I got some weight left in the bike still. That thing is alarmingly loose. And she likes to come right out. At one point now I'm ready to pull the engine out. You know, a bike like this, a lot of stuff's tight, hard to get off, so I need the weight of the engine in it because it kind of gives me something to pull against when I'm pulling on my wrenches, but now that everything's pretty much off of it, I'm gonna pull the engine out, drop the HMC lift down, and start taking the front end off the bike and the dash, and you know, I'm ready to clean and get ready for paint, which feels pretty damn good. I have two sets of bars I'm going to decide between to use for the bike, but regardless, I'm going to take these off. I don't want any of this stuff. I don't want the mirrors, none of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this off as a unit and sell it. Somebody who's restoring a bike or is trying to piece one together cheap. I put this stuff on eBay, you know, and I sell it for no reserve, whatever I can get for it, just so I don't have to throw it out. This whole headlight in the cell has to come off for me to get the forks off. It's kind of a lot of work, but you know, hey. For what I got in this bike, it's worth doing the work. Probably leave the guide driving lights and the blinkers on this thing. I don't think I'm going to use the blinkers. I'll probably just wire them up as running lights. Like I said earlier, it's always nice to have a little something so people can see you when you're on the road. And 4 more bulbs running out front. That's pretty good, you know, it makes me pretty visible. Especially, you know, the deer out here on the road early in the morning, the spotlights. I always turn the spotlights and I point them out a little bit towards the side of the road instead of straight ahead so I can see what's on the shoulder of the road because that's where the deer are feeding early in the morning. Oh, didn't see that coming. Once you get the headlight out, these nacelle pieces just come off. This one comes right off, but the other one's got switches in it for the spot lamps. So I gotta undo the switches first. I put as much of my hardware back as I can. That way it makes it a lot quicker when I go to reassemble. I've done this a million times, so I know where everything goes. But, you know, I don't need a book to put it back together. But it's just a habit I've been doing for years and years, and, you know, why stop now? I get these handlebars off. I pulled the wires. You know, the bars are wired internally for the hand controls. I don't want any of this stuff. I run a real simple setup on my bike. You know, I don't use a horn because nobody listens to it anyhow, so I don't even hook that up. I use the high-low beam switch on the handlebar, and then and that's it. So, you know, that's the only electrical wiring I'll use on the bars. I'm going to change the front brake. I'm not going to use the stock brake. I'm going to show you how the cool setup I'm going to put on here to make this thing really stop, because the front brakes, you know, this is a juice drum rear in 72, and 72 had a factory disc brake up front, but the calipers are always pretty sloppy. They're not you know, like it's on off. There's no feather in your brake. It's either on or off, and that's kind of the way they work. So I don't like them. So I'm going to put something really cool in here, show you how I fabricate something, take something from another bike, you know, not even made in the US, and put it on my Harley here, and how you make something work with what you can have. And it's super affordable, and will stop this thing the way it needs to be stopped. Now, these Harley-Davidson FLHs have a two-piece handlebar. Let's see that real quick. Take this, get this loose. Let's see how that. One side's pivoting, but the other side's still fixed in the bike. So pull this out. So I'm just gonna sell this whole set of bars. They're not bent, which is kind of unusual. Usually they're all bent up and, you know, from being dropped a million times, but somebody's gonna be able to use this. I have no use for it. Somebody else does. Yeah, it's pretty quick and easy. So the odometer says 42,000 miles. That's probably about right, looking at the condition of this bike. I don't really care too much for a speedometer or odometer. I always wear a watch, and a watch is how, you know, because on choppers you don't have that stuff. So I've always worn a watch, and a watch is how I can keep track of my mileage and my time and my fuel consumption. I know if I'm going 60 miles an hour, every hour that I ride, I've gone 60 miles, right? So you know, I usually don't use these. I'll keep it because it fills the hole in the dash, but, you know, don't really have a whole lot of use for it. Going up for sale. And so my dash is off. You know, it goes with the harness. That's all gonna basically stay with this top fork triple tree. You know, the electrical junction is right here. This is where everything under the headlight nacelle on a Harley-Davidson Shovelhead FLH was. And all junctions right here at that box. So, you know, everything will stay together. See, somebody burgered up that dust shield and just put it in there anyhow. All right, that's it. She's mostly apart. I got the frame here ready to be degreased, cleaned up, and prepped for paint. I'm going to paint the frame and swing arm, and a few other parts that go with it. Then I'll take the front end apart. I gotta take the fender off, get the wheel out. I'm gonna take the old tires off, paint the wheels, paint the lower legs on the front end, paint the sheet metal. And then I'm really ready to start putting it back together. It's kind of hard to believe, but there's a lot of work getting it apart. There's a lot to do, but the good thing is I got it apart. Everything looks really great. You know, the bike, the odometer says has 42,000 miles. I believe that. That's not a lot for a bike like this. These Shovelheads are 100, 200,000 mile bikes, so it doesn't seem like a lot of miles for it. And the frame is great. There's no breaks in the frame. There's no damage. Somebody drilled a couple holes in the top of it. I'm going to weld those over just because they need to be welded over. But the front fender needs to be welded. The rear fender needs to be welded. There's a couple small things that you're going to find in a 50-year-old motorcycle that I need to do. But by and large, it's really in great shape. I'm very pleased with what I found. And, you know, the world's ugliest shovelhead will be no more. Got the frame, swing arm, chain guard, exhaust mount, a few other small parts out here. Degreased everything with some Z-Max degreaser, and I've been hitting it with a wire brush. And I've done about 4 good cleanings on it now. I got most of the grease off of it, and then what I'll do is wipe it down with a rag with lacquer and get it ready for paint. Somebody drilled 2 holes in the top of this frame. I'm assuming to run wires or something through it. There are definitely weak spots in the frame where it could crack. So I'm gonna go ahead and grind the paint off of them and fill them with TIG weld real quick. Usually when you weld 2 pieces of flat steel together, you'll grind a V against them so you can get deeper penetration into the V. I'm gonna use a center drill to basically do the same thing with these holes. So, you see I hit both holes with that center drill. What I do with the TIG torch is I go around and preheat the outside of the hole first with the torch. I don't get it to melt, but I just preheat it. And when I come around with my filler rod, it's already really willing to accept the filler rod and bond it with the steel. Bond it with the steel that composes the tubing that the frame is made of. So it's something I do a lot with aluminum, but you can do it with steel too. But you know, a lot of people don't TIG weld, they MIG weld. I like to TIG as much as I possibly can. It allows me to control the heat, allows me to get the penetration right where I want it. So now, you know, 2 minutes of welding, I got this frame ready to paint, and I can start getting the world's ugliest shovelhead back together. All right, so I painted the frame and the swing arm and some other frame related parts this morning, degreased them all, cleaned them, got them painted, and got ready going back together. Started painting the fenders and the tanks. I'm not done with that yet, but I'm gonna start piecing this thing back together a little bit and kind of give you a good feel right away of how different it's gonna look from what I started with. So I'm gonna start putting this thing back together by putting the rear fender struts on it. And the reason for that is I gotta put the shocks on it so that I can get the swing arm on, because the shocks hold the swing arm up, and also get the rear fender fit on it, because it's the hardest thing to get on and off, really. Everything else is pretty simple. So I left these things old and skanky. This bike's gonna have an old, skanky, worn-in vibe to it. So, you know, I didn't even care about repainting the fender struts. I just figure I'll leave them the way they are. They'll be fine like this. And I just start putting everything together loose. Once I get the fender in, I gotta bolt the taillight tag bracket back on. And there are a few parts that go on the rear fender. The rear fender trim has to go on it. So I'm just gonna start loosely putting stuff together, and you'll see how I do it. I don't really care if I scratch anything, because this bike, even though I painted the frame nice, it's gonna get covered in oil and road grease, and when I age the paint on this bike like I did on my little 45 racer that you may have seen, It's gonna make everything look old anyway, so I'm not really don't really care about scratches or anything, because scratches just add to the age of the bike. So this fender is kind of awkward right now because I didn't want to have to take everything off of it, because if I did, it was going to cause me hours of having to fix wiring issues that I just didn't feel like working on. So instead of doing that, I left everything on it, and it's been pretty awkward to say the least. But you can see I went with a kind of like a mustard gold color. There's a reason I did pick this color, and I'll tell you about it later, but I was tough on picking colors. I wanted to go with a blue, but gosh, so many of the bikes I had been blue. I was just looking for something different, so I went with the gold on this one, and I like it. And when I age it, you'll see that it's gonna really make this thing look friggin' cool, man. I kind of got my work cut out for me. Here, getting all this stuff rehung on this bike. It's pretty hard to get everything on here. There's a lot of weight, and everything's kind of wired together. Stuff's gonna be falling, maybe you just heard something go. But I'm gonna do my best. Like I said, if I scratch something, it's not a big deal, because I just can work with the scratches as far as the aging goes. But you know, I mentioned earlier, I kind of like this rear light cage and tag bracket. It's pretty cool. I may black it out, but it's old and rusty. It's kind of got a good look to it the way that it is, and that's the one thing I really want to stick to with this is, you know, I don't want to make this a pretty bike. It is the world's ugliest shovelhead. I want to make it look really cool, but I still want it to have that old gangster vibe, you know. So that's what I'm striving for. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drop the engine back in there now. I mentioned to you before, I always like to get the engine in because it helps weight the bike down, so as I'm working, the thing doesn't want to slide all over the table. Right now, it can move pretty freely. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this thing in there. 160 pounds of Milwaukee love right there. We're scared of hard work around here. So I got an engine in it. Just sit in for now. I'll button that all down later and kind of go through some stuff with you. I want to show you what I'm doing with this thing style-wise, so you see how easy it is to turn one of these bikes around from the world's ugliest shovelhead to a cool one. Okay, I'm going to mount these tanks to the bike just to give you a sense of style and what I'm going for with this. So these are 1959, 1960 tanks. My favorite Harley-Davidson badge of all time. I absolutely love them, and I always really wanted a 59 or 60. I got 3 kids and a lot going on right now. So 59, 60, and these are real panhead tanks, and they're not the best set of panhead tanks, but they're solid. You know, they're banged up, they've been dinged, and they were pretty rough. I painted them gold over top. I scuffed them and cleaned them. I painted gold over top of all the aging that was already there. I don't know if you can see that aging, but I painted over top of that because it's going to help me with the aging I'm going to do to it, with the faux aging I'm going to do. So, but this bike should have 5-gallon tanks because it's electric glide. These are dual glide panhead tanks. They're 3.2 or 3.5 gallons, so they're smaller, but it's the look I want because it's going to kind of look like a 60s panhead really when I'm done with it, especially with the style, the color choices I'm doing, a couple little things doing, you'll see. So we'll go ahead and mount this tank up. And these tanks are going to come back off, but I'm just putting them on. For me, the visual really helps. When I can look at a bike, I can see the lines and everything, and I start seeing it come together. It helps my creativity. But for you too, so that you can get a sense of where I'm going with this thing, because without tanks on them, they always just look funny. And you can see it's right down at the top of that shovel head. I may have to shim these out a little bit in the back, possibly shim them up a little bit. But shovel head engine is bigger, blockier in the top end than the pan head is. So once I tighten it down, it should let me know, but it's right on the top of the engine. The engine can move over in the bike a little bit too. I think I'm gonna have the room I need. Either way, Here's a good sense of what I'm going for. You can start to see already that it has a pretty cool vibe. I'm gonna do some cool little details to it that are gonna really make it pop. And I'm definitely gonna age that paint. I'm gonna age the paint on the bike because it'll look more authentic if I do it that way. So I'm gonna let you guys in on how I do this. You're gonna trip out how I do it. I mean, it's crazy to see, but the other thing that I'm doing to this bike that really changes it up is a seat. And let me show you what I got going on here. Custom seat tool for this bike. This is a, what they call a solo seat or a police seat. Really small compared to what was on it. And I had it covered with no cushion. Cushion doesn't matter. This arch right here gives you lumbar support and gives you what you need so you're not sliding back while you're riding and trying to fight by hanging on the handlebars. So the seat has the look I want. It's going to be comfortable enough to ride long distance. But right there you can get a good vibe again for how different this thing is going to be. That 60s vibe, that 60s dual glide vibe is going on. I have a dual glide oil tank for it. I was going to put it in, but it needs a bunch of work. And I'm thinking I don't really feel like doing all that work right now, and I'm thinking I have to modify a lot of stuff to make it work in this rig. So I'm going to put the original oil tank battery box in it. I'm going to go ahead and get the front end, start getting the front end on now. And I still have a lot of work to do. Let me sit down and talk to you about it. I got so much work to do, I need to sit down and tell you about it. So I got to take the tires off and replace the tires. The tires are shot. So, but I have a vintage style tire I want to use anyhow. While I have them apart, I'm going to paint the wheels black. And then while I have the front forks off of it, all the headlight nacelle was black already, but the four lower legs or sliders are not black. They're still just a unpolished cast aluminum, the way they came from the factory in Harley-Davidson. I'm going to paint these black. I need to go out and clean them, degrease them, scuff them, and set them up for painting. And it's dark out now, and it's, humid out here, so we get a lot of, moisture at night. So I'm gonna wait till the morning to do that stuff. So I'm gonna work with things I can work with right now because it's nighttime. And then there's so much to do, it doesn't matter. But I get this other stuff done tomorrow. I'll get the wheels and tires done and get these lower legs up, start getting them back on. Start really looking like a motorcycle again. And then there's all the little things that you don't think about, that you don't notice, but that need to be done, like rehooking up all the wiring, making sure all the light bulbs work. I gotta, fix the rear brake and probably clean and blow out that rear brake line and get that ready for service. Get all that done so that when I'm ready, I can put the wheels back on it. What are you doing? Are you gonna scratch my new paint, girl? She's such a varmint. Come here, varmint. But anyhow, so there's a lot to do, but I'm just gonna choke away through it like I always do. It's how I do my projects. I just work until it's done. But I think you can get a good vibe here for what I'm going for. I'm so stoked to be using these tanks on this bike. It's a huge difference over what the original tanks would look like on this bike. The seat is a huge difference. All that garbage I took off the back is a big difference. It's gonna make this bike look real sleek. And I'm running lowered shocks on it, so it's going to slam the chassis in the back. It's going to really give it that LA Cholo vibe, but also, the way I like Harley FLH, which is just really trimmed down. These bikes she's probably around 900 pounds with everything on them. I'm probably going to get this thing down to 600 pounds. That's a big difference. Especially, 74 cubic inch engines. I don't know what the cam is in it, but it's not going to be making insane horsepower. But I may have scored an insane carburetor setup for this bike today, and I'll keep you posted on that. But I was over at a buddy's place, and he had this set up, man, and as soon as I saw it, and he saw in my eyes how bad I wanted it, and he just had it in a display case. They made it years ago for racing. If I can get that set up for this bike, it's over, son. It's over. All this stuff like this fender bumper and these lights, and the fender struts have such a great patina on them. I don't want to do anything with them. I'm just going to leave them the way they are. think it makes what I have look so much better. We put the swing arm in it, put the shocks on it. I gotta start tightening these fender struts up. You know, I kind of get the swing arm on and I use it as a gauge, because if you don't tighten these fender struts, if you just tighten them, they'll be crooked, the fender will ride crooked, so you have to get the swing arm in it and then kind of adjust the fender struts so the swing arms are being straight. And I'll leave all this stuff loose on the back right now because that stuff is adjustable too. You want to get the fender where you want it, and then you would tighten that stuff up so when you look at the bike from the rear, everything's now all cockeyed, everything's straight. So I kind of have a method of my madness when I do this. I'm getting ready to paint these lower fork sliders, so I'm going to take this brake caliper off. I'm going to not use this caliper. I'm going to make a bracket and make a custom caliper. You see what I do. I'm going to take this off now so that I can clean and paint the slider. Well, that pin right there should float in the front fork leg, and it's not floating. It's not allowing the caliper to float, so the caliper was dragging. I'm going to hit it with a brass mallet. You can see it starting to come out. I've sprayed lube in there. Let's see, I finally got the caliper off. We'll knock that pin out, we'll be done. The front fender's got 2 broken tabs. They're gonna need to be welded before I can paint it. But I wanted to show you something. So the paint that's on it is painted over top of the original paint on the bike. And the original paint of the bike is what's called sparkling blue from Harley-Davidson. You can see it looks really good on the inside of the fender. The sparkling blue was the color of the last Harley FLH I had. I had a 1970 FLH, and it was sparkling blue. All original paint, original bike. For those of you that don't know much about welding, let me explain a couple things. So here's this piece, and you know, it's got a pretty accurate fit to how it broke off, but you can't just weld over top of that because it's hard to get any penetration. What happens is these sharp edges right here will just melt into each other, and everything below it doesn't get welded. So what you always do is grind a V. So grind a V on this side. So this is going to be basically a point. There'll be 2 points coming together. I'm going to grind those out and get good penetration on this, but you also got to get the paint out of the way, because welding, especially TIG welding, doesn't like any contamination. It likes to be clean when it's done. So I got to grind the paint away, make sure everything's real clean. Let me show you how I do this. I don't know if you can see that as I grind the paint away on the outside, the blue is gone on the outside of the fender. It's still on the inside. They didn't strip the inside, but they must have completely taken this down to the bare metal when they painted this gray on it, because there's no blue coming through here. Okay, I'm going to flip it over and prepare the inside. Okay, so here's how I'm gonna get this mount on flat. I've got some clamping kit clamps from my Bridgeport milling machine. They're the right size, and when I set them under the fender mount sits flat on the table. I use a clamp from my welding table to clamp it down so it can't pull when I weld it. You can see that V-cut that I'm gonna weld into. Clamp down, ready to weld. Super quick and easy. And I just unclamp it. You can see my gap right there that I'm going to fill with my filler rod material. And now I'm gonna flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. I've got all the sheet metal painted except the left side gas tank. Got the front forks painted. Welded the front fender and fixed it before I painted it. Done a lot of work. I'm getting ready to put the front end on right now. Once I get that done, I'm gonna put it up on a couple jacks and lift it up a little bit before it gets too heavy, put the transmission in it, start putting the fork sliders on it, and really getting this thing ready to kind of come back together. I've already greased all the neck bearings. Nothing exciting to see there, so I didn't not showing you that. It's just grease, man. That's all it is. This next part's kind of tricky because I got to bring that top triple tree back up here and basically haul all them cables and spot lamps and everything with it. But there's really no easy way to do it. I'm just gonna get it done. Now I'm gonna put it up on a couple flat jacks because I'm gonna need to elevate it to be able to get the fork tubes in and everything else that needs to be done. And it starts getting heavy after a while. There's probably, what's here now probably weighs close to 300 pounds. So, I'm here by myself. So I'm gonna get it up on these jacks and then make it a little easier for me to work on. All right, so there you have it. Got it raised up. I'm gonna go outside, bring in those fork tube and slider assemblies, get them up in here. Then I get all the headlight cowling back on and get these spot lamps on. Kind of everything's just kind of hanging around right now electrically. Get that all tightened up and I can start running the wiring harness back. I'm not gonna connect the harness now. I can make sure some of these wires need to go under and over the trees and between the fork tubes, and so I wanna get the tubes in now so that I don't make a mistake to start getting everything assembled and realize I can't get a wire or a gang of wires through someplace I need to get them. So I'm gonna put those parts on now. I don't know if you remember how rough these lower legs looked, but I degreased them, cleaned them up real good, and hit them with some semi-gloss. They came out really nice. They look pretty damn good. I definitely wanted to go for that 50s, 60s style look where a lot of stuff was blacked out. So, that paint helped me come a long way in that regard. So I'll slide this guy up in there. Slide him up through that bottom triple tree. And as you get to the top there, just go ahead and draw it down with the top bolt and you're good. The fork tube is flanged here, and it can't go any further up into the top tree than this bolt can draw it. But it slides in the bottom tree here. There's a pinch bolt here that actually holds them steady in the bottom tree. But before you do the pinch bolt, you got to tighten this top nut, which you jamming it against the nut underneath, which is your bearing preset. And you always want to check it when you're done. Make sure it rolls easy. It doesn't have any slop in it, which it doesn't, and you're good to go. Now I can go ahead and put the headlight nacelle on. And now I'm going to pull my wires back. Make sure I got all my wires where they need to be, like my spot lamp and everything is going to be over here. My driving lights, this is my headlight wire. I'm going to go ahead and mount my dash up here now because I got to get these wires pulled through this tree. The headlight nacelle on now. And then line these holes up. It's not usually that easy, but that one went right in. Now I'm going to hold off putting the headlight in because if you remember from earlier, that big gang box where all the wires, that big electrical wiring junction is up here inside the headlight. So I'm going to leave the headlight out because that's going to leave me easy access. Once I start getting this thing really together and throw a battery in it, I go through all the wiring and get everything set up right. Then I put headlight in and everything's back behind there. I'm hoping it's starting to make a lot of sense to you, more and more sense as I put more and more parts on it, how this thing's gonna look, the style I'm going for. You can see what a different bike it is, even though it's the same bike from what I started working with. Just a few small things make a huge difference. And a big part of it is relationship between the seat, the rear fender, the handlebars. Those little things like that make a huge difference. All that work kind of brings us to handlebars. So I got a set of kind of like what you call speedster bars, flat track bars. This bike originally has an internal throttle on it. I'm using the carburetor. I have a choice of a couple of carburetors I'm going to use. I'm going to use the Sns carburetor on it first, an old Super B, tried and true carburetor, but it has a pull throttle, and the way these handlebars work, they actually have a push throttle, push the throttle open versus pulling it open. This is a spring throttle that when you release it, it'll spring back. The original throttles weren't like that. So I'm going to use these handlebars, but if you remember, the handlebars are two-piece that go in the bike. So what I'm going to do is cut these in half and just use each half of these as the handlebars. But they've got a really nice low rise to them, a little bit of pullback, but not too much, not like a buckhorn pullback. So how I'm going to cut these is I'm just going to go ahead and use a seamstress tape that I have here, and really just judge from the middle of the handlebars what looks like the middle to me. I'm pretty confident I'm in a good spot there. I'm just going to mark them right down the middle, and then cut them with a cutting wheel and a grinder, and try these out. If I don't like them, they're like a $20, $25 set of handlebars. I can just buy another set. But I'm going to try this first because I got the Avon Grips, which I really love. They're very comfortable to ride with, and it just fit my hand perfect. And I want the twist pull throttle with the spring release. So if you're using one of these cutting discs like I'm using a 7-inch disc. Most of the grinders you find are for a 4-inch disc. I take the guard off when I'm on a 7-inch disc, but it's not my cat knocking stuff over. It's not super safe without the guard. So I always wear a face shield. I recommend it. Don't do this without one. Very, very dangerous. I've had some close calls with these things, and the face shield's a must-have. See, I think it makes quick work of it. I don't even have to deburr it. So you see how that goes in there. Let me take this one off. I hate wearing them. It makes your face hot, makes you sweat, but gotta have it. And there's the other bar. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these down for right now. And we'll see if I end up actually using them, if I like them. All right, Shovelhead lovers, y'all gonna love me for this one. Shovelhead, Ironhead Sportster people. Getting the O-ring intake manifold on. It's not easy. I'm gonna show you how I've been doing it for years. So, first thing I always do is check my manifold fit. Sometimes the manifold is pushed out too far, it doesn't line up. All right, once you take a look at this, you see how good that manifold fits in there? Sometimes there's a gap or not a really great fit. This one just really happens to fit perfectly inside here. If they don't, usually you gotta put the manifold in a milling machine or on a belt sander and sand this lip down just a hair so it fits right. But this one lines up so good, it's unbelievable. When you torque the heads down building an engine, you can rotate the heads a little bit and get them to line up with the manifold. That's what I always do, but I was surprised to find out how good this one fit. Getting the manifold in there and getting these O-rings in is always a pretty big hassle. So I'm gonna show you how I do it. I take my intake manifold and I roll and force the O-ring up over the manifold. And you got to kind of work it back so it doesn't try and roll off on you. But just like that. And then on the other side, do the same thing. And this is how you get these things in there. This has been top secret for years. Some of you vets who've been doing this for a long time might know this trick, but that's how I do it. And then you put it in there, and you get your intake lined up with the head port, and you roll the O-ring off, and the O-ring holds it in place. So that's my method. It doesn't stop there. So the next thing you gotta do is get the intake clamps on the engine. You gotta be real delicate with this so you don't knock the intake manifold off. But I take my clamp and I open it up, take the nut completely off. And I always have the one stud from the rear cylinder pointing forward and the stud from the front cylinder pointing rearward like that on the top. And this is how I always do it. I get them in here. I do them one at a time. I bring this around, and you got to be real careful. You got to kind of support the intake manifold with your hand, and then bring that clip up and kind of roll it back. And I've got big hands, so it's a little easier for me to do this. You got to realize when you do this, you got to leave room for the other clamp to come across too. So it might look sweet and pretty all right now because you got the one on, but this one is going to want to come down this way too. So usually you got to run one down, one a little bit higher than the other. Okay, the other thing I do, I use a 1/4 inch ratchet with an extension. A 3/8 ratchet is just so big and bulky, and it makes it harder to manage one-handed because a lot of times you need one hand on one end. So I'll come in and I'll snug this down a little bit just so it's not super loose. There you go. Now same thing with the other one. I'm gonna take the nut off, spread it. Get it back in here. There we go. Same thing, I put that little collar up in there. Get my nut on. You know, you can see what I mean. This one can't roll back any further because this piece of the clamp is up against the head. So if I hadn't rolled this one down, these two would be interfering with each other. So I got one high, one low. The same thing, I'll come around here. That's it, there you have it, you have a good fit. And the way I always check to make sure it's right is run my finger inside here along the inside lip. You shouldn't really have any hang-ups on either side. It should be a smooth transition from intake manifold right to the head. If it's not, you know, it's not done right. This is super, super critical. I hope it helped. You know, the last thing you want is an air leak in your intake manifold. First of all, happens you start getting leaks out on the road. It's a pain in the butt. There's not a lot you can do to fix it a lot of times. You know, usually it's easiest to do this kind of work with the gas tanks off and a lot of stuff out of the way. So, you know, you want it to happen in the shop, not on the side of the road, but you get this right and you'll never ever have any tuning problems. You see me kick bikes one kick all the time. This has a lot to do with it because I make sure they're not sucking any air in that intake manifold. Everything, all the fuel air mixtures being metered right in the carburetor and not here at the intake manifold seal. Here's my Sns Super B Carburetor. I'm using this carburetor for a couple of reasons. One reason is because they run really good, but the other reason is because I have this. This is an old SNS Velocity stack with a SNS Bell air horn. And I love this look, but more than anything, this came off of one of Lou Falsigno from CNL Hog Shop's bikes years ago. I made the brackets were missing, but the bell came off of one of his bikes. I was a big fan of his bikes. CNL Hog Shop did some of the coolest bikes that I can remember ever been in Easy Rider magazine. And so I kind of want to use this on this bike. So that's why I got this on here. I'm gonna go ahead and install this now. Wasn't getting any leg clearance the way that bike is set up. I didn't have any leg clearance to get my foot to the brake pedal. So I took it off, and now it'll find its way on here. All right, I'm knocking out my list of things to do on this bike. I'm getting ready to put the gearbox in it, get the belt drive on it, get the oil tank and battery box in it. I got the gearbox in loose. I'm gonna go ahead and put the oil tank and battery box in. I was almost gonna run a Harley Panhead Duo Glide oil tank in this bike, but I was gonna have to cut some stuff off the frame. I really wasn't ready to do that just yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and do it this way. This is the mount. They call it the Mousetrap Eliminator because Panheads used to have a mousetrap clutch assembly on them, which is something I'd have to show you for you to even understand it. But when they quit using them and started using a regular clutch cable right directly to the transmission, they used the Mousetrap Eliminator. And this serves two purposes. It holds the clutch cable and it mounts the oil tank and battery box. In comes the oil tank. And it mounts to these two rubber mounts on this side of the bike. There's a rubber mount there and a rubber mount there. Battery box mounts up to the oil tank and these two bolts right here. I think I have a new battery for this. They've had for a lot of years, but I'm going to check and see. I'm going to go ahead and put the cover on for now. Got to dig the battery up for this thing. I'm going to go ahead and get the box and the cover on it now, just to make sure I have everything. This way, if I'm missing something, I can go dig it up. Right, there's the battery box installed. There's a stainless steel strap that goes over the top that I don't have. Like I said, this wasn't with the bike when I got it, but there's a local shop that I go to that they've been around for a long time, real bikers, and they have a lot of old parts, huge old parts stash. And I always recommend that to you. If you got a local shop that has old Harley parts, you can buy an old Harley part instead of a new Taiwanese reproduction. I always recommend you go buy the old Harley-Davidson part from your local shop, give them some cash for it. And that's the way I always like to do it. That way, you know, pretty much everything on this bike is still original Harley-Davidson parts. I'm at the point where I'm ready to tighten up these rear fender struts. Get this rear fender really fully mounted on here. All right, so now that thing's on there. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the tail light, get the tail light and the turn signal bar and the tag bracket and everything straight. Run the electrical wire back up through the loom underneath the fender and pull that harness up here where it's going to meet the front half of the harness. Now with the fender tight, I'm just tightening up everything back here and the rear lighting. You know, the turn signal bar, the tail light's tight. I got those two guys straight. And now this tag bracket and running light bar, I just got to get it on here straight. So I snug everything up to the fender, get it almost tight, and then get it, step back and take a look and make sure it's right. It's a little cocked clockwise right now. See there? There's a cocked clockwise. Let me get it straight. Now sometimes when I tighten it'll pull again and I might have to go back and readjust it, but you know, it's like always, you do the best you can. I'm at the point where I'm ready to put the front fender back in and put the fender trim on it. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna get this thing in here. I'm gonna try not to scratch it up. And remember what I said, you know, if it does get scratched, it's okay, because this bike's gonna get that old look anyhow. These big FLH fenders are always real tricky to get in here. So I always come in from the rear, rotate it as they come in, and press with my hands, get those fender mounts you've got nice paint, you're going to want to, you know, tape it or wrap it with rags or whatever, which gets in the way. But do something to protect it. I didn't really need to because of what I said I'm doing with my paint. Real good. Alright, now I just got to put the front fender trim on it. A little on the tricky side because everything was pretty rusty, but I'll get it on and see what we can get done next. I don't know if y'all can hear the sirens. I can't remember the last time I made a video, I didn't hear sirens in the background. I'm kind of down here in the hood in Columbia. All the wild bulls out there doing their stuff, you know, so it's always, especially at night. You out here shooting the other night, wild stuff. I get this fender trim on, might be a little tricky. It didn't come off real easy. I'll tell you what, everything was real rusty. There's some things have been real easy on this bike, and some things have been real difficult. So you do that. You gotta slide this stinger up. It starts to get tight. And push it back. You get at least one more up on here. These things are real rusty. I'm gonna spray some lube on them. And then this front bumper has to go up in here on the front, and they line up with each other. What I do is I just use a screwdriver real carefully to shut that stinger up. That's a good tight fit. I'll tighten down what I can on the back side. Alright. See that front one? For the bike. Hey, well, that's about all I got in me for part one of the world's ugliest shovelhead. I mean, I've done a lot of work. You know, I took over 100 pounds of junk off of this bike. Took it from being the world's ugliest shovelhead to being a pretty damn good looking motorcycle. And I'm not done yet. There's still so much to do. I gotta fix this other gas tank and paint it. Fuel lines, oil lines, electrical wiring. I gotta do the brakes, front and rear brakes. I still have to do the primary belt drive on this side, clutch, all that stuff, foot controls. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done. But this is a couple full, solid days of work. You can see I made a hell of a lot of progress. I hope you like what you see. Please subscribe, like, leave your comments. You know, I'm going to respond to them. And I'll be back with the second installment on this real soon. And I'll get this thing running for you. We're going to take it for a ride. World's ugliest shovelhead. You know it was.